Hey there guys! So today we'll be doing sprites. So we're going to set up the sprites for our character and a couple NPCs. So now I'm sorry this video has taken a bit longer to put up. I realized halfway through that I wanted to do things a bit differently because a lot of the tutorials out there already about sprites, they show you how to set up a sprite like this. So we have our player character and all the frames for its animation. We can play the preview here. We can set the speed. We can set up its collision mask here. And you can imagine in our game, we'd need a couple other sprites like this to represent the full range of our character's movement. So this sprite is for when the player is moving to the side, but we'd also need separate ones for up and down. So we'd need 3 sprites for movement. And we're actually going to be doing things differently, but let me just show you how you'd go about importing a sprite from, say, a complete sprite sheet. So this is my sprite sheet right here. You can see it's got a lot of different animations. Here is the walking ones. We've got shooting a bow and arrow, I think here. I think we've also got dying. And we could use all of these for a lot of different player actions. But if I just wanted to grab the ones relevant to moving, say I only wanted to import these sprites right here for the side movement, I would want to import just this strip. So in Game Maker, if I just start off with a fresh new sprite here, what I'd do is I'd double click here to go into the image editor. So we'd come up to the image here. We'd hit import as a strip image, right? I don't want to import the entire image. I want to just import a bit of it. So hit import strip. Here is my sprite. Open. And this little window will pop up. Let me just make it a bit bigger. And remember to move around these little windows like this, you just are holding the middle mouse button, and to zoom, we hit Control and scroll. Okay, so here is the sprites that I want. This is the walking to the side animation. So the first thing I want to do is come up here, and it's asking me how many frames are in your sprite, in your animation. So we can count them here, and we can see that there's 9, so we're going to put 9. And then it's asking how many frames per row, so rows go across, so there's 9. And then it's asking how big the sprite is, just for one frame. So if you haven't made this sprite, you might have to go into the sprite and see what fits. But I can tell you that they're 64 by 64 each. So let's put 64 by 64. And now we're going to want to set the location. So I can just click around and I can kind of approximate it. But I want to be really precise. I want it to be in multiples of 64. So for the horizontal offset, I know that's going to be 0 because we're starting from the start of the image. And for the vertical offset, what I normally do is I just kind of approximate it like this. And then I bring up a calculator and I'll just go 713 divided by 64. There we go. So the closest is 11. So 11 times 64 is 704. So that's the coordinate that we want. 704. There we go. So that's the strip that we want. If we wanted to do the downwards movement or the upwards movement, we just subtract multiples of 64 from this. But we've got it all set up, so let's hit convert. Yep. And it's imported it for us. And we can preview the animation here. And we just do that a couple times to import all of the directions that we want or all of the actions that we want. And this is a fine way to do it. This is the way that most people will show in their tutorials. It's sort of the classic way to set up your sprites. It's certainly, Game Maker is certainly set up this way to help you do this and help you preview your animations. And it's great for action games or platformers or games where your characters, they have a specific design that doesn't change throughout the game, right? It's always the same person, they've got the same clothes. But for our game and for a lot of RPGs, you might want to allow your player to gain new clothing over the game and change the character's appearance, change their hair, or even just have a character creator. So what we might want to do is, instead of drawing our complete sprite, we might want to break it up and draw everything separately. So we'll draw the base, then the clothes, whatever our clothes are that we currently have equipped, and then our hair. And we're going to be drawing those all separately in layers. And that's what I want to do today. So we'll be setting up a sprite layering system. And I'm also going to take it one step further in an effort to reduce the number of sprites we have. So instead of importing everything as strips for all of the different movement directions, we're actually going to import the entire sprite sheet and then manually draw part of the sprite. So this is a bit more advanced, but I thought it'd be interesting to do things a bit differently, and I hope you can appreciate why you might want to set it up this way, and why it's heavily dependent on the kind of game that you're making. So let's jump back to where we left off last time, and let's get started. Alright, so first things first, we're going to be getting the assets for our sprites. So I'm going to be using sprites from the liberated Pixel Cup, and this is a sort of repository on GitHub that just has a bunch of the different assets for the characters. If you've got your own sprites to use, that's totally fine, or you can go and make your own. If not, just follow this link, and I'll link to it in the description, and you can get them all from here. So what I want you to do is design a few characters. So design a player character and maybe a couple NPCs. And what we're going to be doing is we'll get a base, which is kind of like a skin color, a hair, some shoes, pants, and a shirt. And you can have different ones for all the characters, or if you want, you can just make them all the same or whatever you want. So if you scroll down, you can also preview all of the assets in this link here. So this is sort of an online character creator. So let's just open it. And so you can come into here and you can preview what everything looks like. And it will show it up there. So you can build your characters and then come into the assets and download the matching PNG files. So let's come back. Let me just show you a couple examples. So let's grab a hairstyle. So let's come into hair. Let's go male. Let's go plain. And so here you can grab whatever hair color you want. Let's just go green. Here it is. So let's save it, and now make sure that you're saving all of these in some kind of consistent way. So what I've done is I've gone gender and then I've labeled the kind of asset that it is. So here I've got male, hair, the style of hair, so bed head, and the color. And for all of the other kinds of assets, I've named them in this sort of consistent way too. So I've got gender, the asset type, so feet, style, so the boots, and the color. And I've done similar things for the pants and the torso. So yeah, once you've got a bunch of these kinds of assets, we can start importing them into the project, or you can just download the ones that I have selected. I will leave a link in the description to that as well. Alright, let's come back into the project. Alright, so let's start importing the assets. So just like before, I want to maintain a consistent naming strategy. So I'm going to be creating distinct folders for all my different kinds of assets. So I'm going to add a group. I'm going to call this characters. And this will be the kind of umbrella that holds all the other folders. So we're going to create another group for the bases. And another one for hair. Torso. Legs. And feet. And let's start importing the bases. So let's create a new sprite. Let's hit import. We're going to be importing the entire sprite sheet. And I've stored them here. We'll import all of them one by one. So we'll go this one first. And I'm going to call this spur base female 1. And do the next one. No. 2. And might just fast forward this a bit. Alright, and that's finally done. So you should have something that looks like this. And all your naming should be consistent. It's fine if you've got more or less than I have. But we're done with these for now. So we can collapse all of them and close this. So let's start coding. So let's come into objects and go into the player object. And we're going to be using the draw event. So for now, let's just try and draw part of one of our sprites. So the function that we're going to be using a lot today is draw sprite part. And let's just open up the documentation on this one so we can have a look at what it does. So you can see here all of the different arguments that we have to give it. We have to give it the index of a sprite to draw, and then the frame. So remember, because we're just importing it, we only had that one frame. And then we have to tell it what part of the sprite that we want it to draw. So what we have to do is give it the left coordinate, which is the X position, which will be this point right here in this sprite. The top, so the Y position of the top left corner of the area to draw, so that's up here. And then the width, how big is the area that you want me to draw, and then the height. That is enough information for the function to draw a specific area of the sprite. And of course then we give it a coordinate to draw that part too. Alright. So let's give it a sprite. Let's give it the base of whatever your character was going to look like when you were designing the player character. So I'm going to give it base 5. So SPR base female 5. And now I'm giving it the subimage. So we're putting 0 because remember that subimages start at 0 instead of 1, just like a lot of things in programming. Now we have to get the coordinates. So let's open up this sprite so we can have a look. And just like before, I'm going to get the coordinate for this square of the walking. So if you remember, our frames, they come in 64 by 64, and the coordinate for this frame was 704 for the Y offset, and it was 0 for the horizontal. And that's the top left corner that we want to be giving it. Alright, so let's go back to the player. So for left, we put 0. For the top, we put 704. The width of the area that we're drawing, 64. Same for the height. And let's just draw this at the object's XY location. So hopefully it will draw that one frame of the sprite. We're not going to be drawing that white square that we made anymore, because by making a draw event, we're overriding the default, where it would just be drawing whatever sprite it's assigned to. Instead, we've just got it drawing this sprite. So if we run the game, hopefully we should just see our little frame. Yep, and there it is. So the first thing I want to do is come into the room. I'm just going to change that background color because it's a bit harsh and we can't really see the character. I'm just going to make it a greeny color. Yeah, that'll do. So we'll just leave it like that for now. So the next thing I want to do is get it animating. So, and to do this, we'll have to be changing, so let's just come back to here. So we'll want to be changing that X coordinate of the frame we're getting. So the Y will be staying the same. We still want it to start here, but we're changing the X. So we want it to be jumping in multiples of 64 to draw each frame. Let's come to the player and let's set up a few variables. So instead of just having these direct number inputs like this, we're going to put variables instead, and we're going to be changing these variables. So let's put X frame for here and Y frame here. And for now, let's just set X frame to be that variable 0 before, and the Y frame to be 704. Now let's try and change X frame. Let's try and get X frame to increase as time goes on. So we're going to be increment frame for animation. So let's go X frame and let's just plus equal, let's just add to it 1. So this should move the area that we want to draw over in our sprite sheet. So let's run the game and just see what that looks like. It's not going to be perfect, but I just want to show you. So you can see it's kind of scrolling over. So it's not going up in those multiples of 64. We want it to be going up in multiples of 64. And also you can see here that it's run out of frames. It keeps increasing. There's nothing setting it back to the start. So we also need to do that. So let's set up a variable for the total length of the animation. So let's go var anim length. And remember it's 9 frames long, so 9. And I'm going to say if X frame is less than the total animation length, but we actually have to put -1 because remember the frames, they start at 0. So if we haven't hit the maximum length of the animation, then go ahead and increment it. Otherwise, we're going to set it back. So I'm just tapping forwards here to 0. So that will fix the looping problem, but now we have to fix the scrolling problem. So we want it to be going up in those multiples of 64. So we can actually do that from inside here. So first I want to set up one more variable. Let's go the frame size and set this to 64. And now we can put this variable in place here. Okay. And I'm going to have xFrame, instead of going up in pixels, I'm going to have it going up in complete frame. So I want it to be 0 and then 64, 128 and etc. So I'm going to go xFrame and I'm going to times it by the frame size. Let's have a look at that. So that's working, but it's going way too fast, right? So let's decrease the speed. So let's set up a variable for speed, var anim speed. And if we come back to the sprites, you can see that it defaults to 15 frames per second. And I've had a little play around, and I think 12 frames per second looks pretty good for our sprites. So I'm going to put 12. But to get the per second thing, we need it to be a ratio. So we're going to put anim speed over 60, which is our frames per second. Now this will bring back our problem of scrolling, because xFrame, it's going to be equaling 0 and then 0.234 until it hits a full number again, and that's when we would be getting 1 times 64, 2 times 64. But we'll be getting decimals, so it's going to be showing the scrolling again. So we need to make xFrame only ever equal a whole number. So we want to round it. There's a few different functions for this. We can round it up, down, or to the nearest whole number. We want to round it down completely. So we're going to floor the variable, it's called. So we're going to put floor the xFrame. All right, let's have a look at that. There we go. So the next thing to do is get our sprite to change depending on what direction we're moving. And the thing that we want to be altering for this, remember, is the Y frame, so that we can get this coordinate instead of this one for left and this one for up. So depending on what button we're holding down, I want to change the Y frame to be a different value. So how can I get what direction I'm facing? We could do keyboard checks, that's how we set up the movement if you remember. But we also have these variables that we set up right here that will also carry the information for what direction we're facing. So if you remember, if we're pressing the left button, move X is going to be negative. And if we're going right, move X will be positive. If we're going up, move Y will be negative. Remember, if we're going upwards, it's actually negative. And if we're heading down, then move Y will be positive. So we can use this. We can go, if move X is smaller than 0, then the Y frame So let's get the Y offset for each of our movement directions. So starting at 0, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So up is 8, 9 is left, 10 is down, and right is 11. So let's make a note of that. And let's come back. So if we're moving left, I want Y frame to be 9. And before we forget, we should also make Y frame be a multiple of frame size. And else if move X is larger than 0, then we'll be moving right. And the Y frame for the right movement was 11. Let's copy it a couple more times. And if Y, so now this is for up and down, so if move Y is negative, then we're moving up and we want the Y frame to be 8. And finally, if we're going down, move Y will be positive and the Y frame we want at 10. Great, so let's run that and have a look. I think it started off blank because in the create event we made Y frame equal 0, but that's fine. But you can see that the movement's working. Left, up, right, and down. Perfect. So one thing that you might be noticing is one of the frames is sort of off, and that's actually the very first frame, because that's the idle. That's how the artist has made our sprite sheets. So all of these are actually the idle sprites, and they look a little bit weird in the animation, so we want to exclude them. So instead of going back to 0, I'm actually going to be going back to 1. So we're starting at 1, we can change X frame, I'm going to change it to 8. Alright, and let's just quickly check that. Yep, so you can see the animation's a bit smoother now. And finally, we want to make it stop when we're not pressing any of the buttons. So we want it to go to that idle, which will be frame 0. So if we're moving, this is all of our movement cases, but we need, if we're not pressing, if none of those are true, and that will mean that we're standing still and we want to change to the idle. So else, and we can go, so the X frame, we want it to be 0. Okay. There we go. Alright, so we're making a lot of progress. Next thing to do is to draw on the clothing layers. And now because of all the setup that we've done, this bit's actually a lot easier, because all of the coordinates for all of the sprites are going to be exactly the same. So if you open up one of these, you'll see that they will correspond exactly to the base sprites. So I'm going to put in some comment sections. So we're going to go draw character base. I'm going to copy this. And put feet. And a couple more. Legs, shirt, and hair. And now the order is important here because this is the order that it's drawing all of these. So we want the base to be drawn first because we want everything else to appear on top of it. You don't want to be drawing that last. And depending on sort of the style of the clothing that you're going for, you also want the pants to be appearing on top of the feet, or you'll get shoes sticking out over your pants, and we don't want that. So be careful with the order of these. So as I was saying, we've done all the setup to get the coordinates of the sprite parts to draw. Now all we have to do is change the sprite that it's drawing. So for the feet, we can go spur feet and pick whatever shoes that you gave your character. The legs, shirt, and finally the hair. Great, and let's run it. There we go. There's our character. So there's a couple more things I want to do in this video. So to account for the collision that we set up before, we've kind of messed things up with collision boxes and everything. You might be wondering what it's even using. So to check out where our collision box is, I'm just going to show you a quick little way to visualize it. So we're going to draw rectangle, go color. And so I'm going to draw a rectangle around where the collision box is. And there's a few coordinates for this, so it's called a bounding box. So let's go B box left, B box top, B box right, B box bottom. And I'm going to draw this in yellow. I'm going to give it the color yellow. It's asking for a bunch of different colors because you can actually make it multicolored, the different parts of the rectangle, so you can do that if you want. And I'm actually going to say I do want this as an outline because I'm only trying to visualize the box. So I'm going to put true. And let's have a look. So this is the bounding box, and this is because its collision mask here is set to the sprite that it was assigned. So remember, we're not drawing that sprite anymore because we were overriding the default with our draw event, but it's still treating that as our collision box. Plus we've got this problem that the sprite is sort of, what it's actually drawing is sort of offset from where the bounding box actually is. So if we're colliding with something, it's not going to be accurate at all. So we've got two problems to fix. So what we're actually going to do is set up a general collision mask that all of the people are going to have. So I'm going to come into one of these. I'm just going to grab one of these sprites just for reference. And I'm going to copy one of these. I'm going to make a new sprite. I'm going to call this Spur Character Mask. So what I'm doing here is I want to snap it to a certain area. So I'm going into the grid, hitting snap, and I want to snap it to 64, and that will let me paste it exactly where it was in that other sprite. So I'm actually going to paste it completely black because I just want the outline. And I might just color it a bit lighter. And I'm going to manually set the coordinates to be... It's not appearing right now because I think it's zeroed everything, so let's just give it some coordinates. There we go, bring it down to here. That looks okay. We can change this later if we want. I'm doing it only at its feet for our illusion of depth, and you'll see why a bit later. But basically I want it to, if there's a wall like here, if you can just imagine a wall here, I want it to be able to come right up to the wall and kind of have its body overlapping. So I only want it to be colliding at its feet. So we also want to set an origin. So let's turn off the mask. And I want the origin to be a little bit above the bottom center because our sprites aren't exactly at the bottom. And we're going to lift it up and we'll put it about there. Okay, let's come back to the player. And we're going to set its mask as this. So you can set whatever sprite you want, and then you can set a different mask. We can put the same for both. Doesn't really matter. Maybe we'll put icons later so that we can see everything a bit easier in our project hierarchy. But for now, that'll be fine. So now we should be seeing a smaller box as the bounding box. There we go. So that takes care of one problem, but we've still got it flying way off here. And that's because when we're drawing part of the sprite, we're starting at its top left corner. So it's drawing it right there, but the sprite is this big. So it looks like it's been shunted down. So we have to correct for that when we're drawing it. So instead of drawing it at X and Y, we're actually going to set up a couple new variables. So we're going to go var xx and var yy. And now we want this to be equal to x, but with some kind of correction. So, and I'm going to call this variable, and we haven't set this up yet, but I'm just going to call it x offset and y minus y offset. And let's change all of these to be xx, yy. Okay. And we're going to set these in the create event. So let's come into the create. So x offset and y offset. I'm going to use a function to get the value for this variable. So basically we need something that gets us from here down to here. So it's going to be roughly like 60 and then 32 or something. But we can get the value of this precisely using a function called sprite get x offset, right? And the sprite whose x offset we want to get is the mask. And I don't specifically have to type in the character mask. I can actually just go whatever mask that you've assigned me. So there is a variable called mask index, and that's just going to get whatever this is set to. And so we're doing the same for Y. Right, and so these should now correct where we're drawing the sprite. So let's run the game and have a look. There we go. So we've got it working now. So the final step for us is to generalize the system a little bit more so that we can swap out the clothes. So if I pick up a red shirt, I want to be able to change the shirt that she's wearing. So instead of straight up telling it what sprite to draw, again, we're going to substitute this with a variable. I'm sure you're seeing the pattern by now about how useful it is to generalize the system and be speaking in terms of variables instead of just numbers. So instead of this, we're going to set up spur base, and then we'll make that equal to this. Spur torso, spur legs, spur hair, and feet. And let's grab all of these. Okay, and we'll sub them in. Alright, and that should work exactly the same. So now it should be drawing whatever these variables are set to, and we can change these at different points in the game. So this allows it to be really flexible. And we'll just run that to make sure there's no problems. Yep, all good. Alright, so now we can make NPCs. I'm just going to duplicate the player. I'm going to call it OBJ Silvio is one of my NPCs. And now all I have to do to get this to draw someone different is change these variables because we've done all of the setup. So I'm just going to change this to SPR base male and just put in whatever you want your NPCs to look like. There we go. And I'm going to make a couple other ones. Lena and Maisie. So just do that for a couple other NPCs. Okay, and let's add them all to the room. Go. And let's run the game. And there we go, we've got all of our characters. So obviously they've got all of the code for the player movement, and we'll delete that later, but just to have a look. You can see how doing a lot of work earlier on can kind of save you time later. Obviously there's other things that we could do to improve the system. So at the moment, our sprites, there's a lot of empty space that we really don't need, and there's a lot of superfluous sprites that we might not even end up using. So I think we have sprites for like attacking and everything. We might do that later, but I'm not sure if you'd even want those in the game. So obviously if there's anything you didn't want by the end of the game, you would want to delete all of these. You'd also want to sort of compress all of the sprites so that there's less room in between them. You can see there's quite a lot of room here. You might also want to use shaders to do the coloring of everything. So if you remember, so especially for the hairstyles, you might want to have like 50 different colors for the hair, but you're not going to want 50 different sprites for every single different kind of hair. You just want one kind of base. Unfortunately, there aren't shaders in the trial version, but this will do for now. And you can easily see how the system could be expanded and made more efficient. So I hope you guys found this helpful. In the next video, we'll finally be looking closer at this room editor and setting up the views So as you saw before, when we run our game right now, it's zoomed out quite a lot and the window is not a great shape. So we'll be changing that next time, and we'll also be doing some tiles and importing more assets to start building up our little game and making it look more like a farm. For now, I hope you found that helpful, and I'll see you next time.